There we go. Got it started.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Marco Graziani. I am a TMDL coordinator with the Municipal Wastewater section at MPCA. I've been doing this for a very, very, very long time. And Mark and I had written a nice bio and introduction, but Mark is not here and he didn't share it, and I'm not going to read it. So here I am. I know a lot of you, and if I don't know you, I hope to meet you someday. I'm going to start sharing my screen. There we go. Is that working?
Looks good.
Okay. Very well. So we are here to talk about the PCA's new wastewater nitrogen reduction strategy. It was published on April 1st, 2024. And here goes. So the presentation is essentially going to be organized in a why, a what, and a how. So I'm going to start out with the why. Why are we doing this? So there are very high nitrate concentrations, primarily in southern Minnesota streams, as shown by the map on the left. And the trends shown in the map on the right have been rising or no trend detected. And no trend detected means that the sites have too much variability to give a 90% or better level of confidence that the trends are statistically significant. So very high nitrate concentrations. We are developing a nitrate aquatic life toxicity standard, which I'll talk about more later, but the map on the left represents 512 streams that will potentially exceed the values that have been developed that will be the basis for the rulemaking for the new water quality standard. Again, primarily concentrated in southern Minnesota, but also some in central and northwestern Minnesota. The map in the center map shows 415 stream segments that are impaired for the index of biological integrity, and those impairments have been linked to excess nitrate. So again, southern Minnesota and, venturing up into central Minnesota a little bit. So lots of nitrate issues. The map on the right shows the potential water quality-based effluent limits, the WQBEL acronym, or wastewater allocations, WLAs, for wastewater treatment facilities based on either the impairments shown in the map on the left or the impairments shown in the map in the center. Now, there's some overlap between these. There are basically the orange dots represent 132 outfalls that are estimated to probably need nitrogen limits based on the draft water quality standards. But then 50 of those orange dots are also upstream of the IBI impaired streams. The blue dots represent 401 outfalls that are upstream of, that are basically in the watersheds of those impairments. And so they may require TMDL wastewater allocations when we get to doing TMDLs for these. And those TMDL wastewater allocations could result in reduction requirements. But some of the blue dots represent very low flow, very low volume, or very low concentration discharges, like non-contact cooling water or dewatering of basically gravel pits and those kinds of things. So not all of them will require reductions, is the moral of the story. So why else are we doing this? There's, as you know, severe issue with a zone of low dissolved oxygen in the Gulf of Mexico that is caused largely by excess nutrients in the Mississippi River flowing into the Gulf. There are 12 states, 8 federal agencies, and the National Tribal Water Council are part of a Gulf Hypoxia Task Force that for many years has been working on trying to solve this Gulf hypoxia issues. So the top 12 contributing states that are listed here: Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio, Tennessee, and Wisconsin, have developed state-level nutrient reduction strategies that are aimed at achieving 45% reductions in the loads of total nitrogen and total phosphorus in their states in order to, 45% reductions to the Mississippi River from their states in order to reduce the size of the hypoxic zone in the Gulf. Minnesota contributes around 6% of the nitrogen to the Gulf of Mexico. It's the 6th largest contributing state. The goal for the task force is to reduce the aerial extent of the Gulf of Mexico hypoxic zone to less than 5,000 square kilometers. So that's 1,930 square miles by the year 2035. And that is a running 5-year average, is the way it's going to be is measured. So the graphs show the extent, the aerial extent of the hypoxic area from 1985 to 2023, and the dotted line is the 5-year average, the running average, and the solid dotted line, the horizontal dotted line is the goal. So it waxes and wanes depending on many factors, as you can imagine. The bottom graph basically shows the nitrogen load in metric tons per year from 1985 through 2022. The red bar represents an estimate, but the graph was generated before the data were available for 2022. So why else were we doing this? Lake Winnipeg experiences severe algal blooms. It's in Manitoba. In the 3 U.S. states, the Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. U.S. and Canadian agencies and binational organizations have been working on plans to address excess nutrients in the Red River. The Red River contributes a disproportionate amount of phosphorus to Lake Winnipeg, even though it's a relatively smaller part of the entire watershed, which stretches out to the west of this map through Saskatchewan to the Rockies. In September of 2019, the International Red River Board developed total nitrogen and total phosphorus concentration objectives and load targets for the Red River at the U.S.-Canada border. In May 2020, the International Joint Commission published its support of the Red River Board's recommendations, and in October of 22, the U.S. State Department and Global Affairs Canada approved the IJC's recommendations to add all 4 objectives and targets to the Red River Board's list of water quality objectives. So the objectives are total phosphorus 0.15 milligrams per liter, which is essentially consistent with our river eutrophication criteria, our water quality standards. Total nitrogen concentration of 1.15 milligrams per liter, which is about 1/7 of our recommendation for warm and cool water streams. So it's a very, very low concentration objective. Their targets are 1,400 metric tons per year of total phosphorus and 9,525 metric tons per year of total nitrogen. So these are goals to be met at the border. So we have a nutrient reduction strategy. It's currently being updated. It was published in 2014. We hope to publish the update in 2025, I believe. And the table represents the reduction goals for the Mississippi and the Red River, for Lake Superior, and then for the for statewide groundwater. Essentially, there are eutrophication, aquatic life toxicity, and drinking water protection targets for in-state waters, and then downstream water reduction goals for the Gulf of Mexico, for Lake Winnipeg, for other territories and states that are downstream of us. Iowa rivers have very high nitrates. Some of them, the Des Moines River and the Cedar River, are both drinking water sources. Nitrogen reduction goals for Lake Superior Basin and the Rainy River Basin have not yet been developed. I believe that those will be part of our targets for our updated nutrient reduction strategy. So I mentioned these draft aquatic life toxicity nitrate water quality standards. Phil Munson published a technical support document, which is on our website. The link is shown above. And those criteria, which is EPA speak for standards, are 60 milligrams per liter nitrate as an acute value, and then chronic values of 5 milligrams per liter for cold water streams and 8 milligrams per liter for cool and warm water streams and lakes, I think. The rulemaking has been delayed to allow for the development of this wastewater implementation strategy that I will speak about more later, and for the update of the nutrient reduction strategy. So the expectation is that the rulemaking will resume in 2025 and may take some time. It may be a little bit controversial. So these data are from the statewide nitrogen in Minnesota surface waters report from 2013. And all three of these tables essentially are showing the same thing, but I would point out the, I am primarily concerned with what are described here as point sources, which in this case means wastewater. And we use point sources to describe regulated sources also. So regulated stormwater are also in some cases point sources, as are feedlots. But in this case, I believe they were just wastewater. And so the reason I highlighted it is during an average year, wastewater is 9% of the total statewide load to surface waters for total nitrogen. But during dry years, they can be up to 18%, and then during wet years down to 6%. And so you can see, cropland drainage and cropland groundwater are the largest sources during average years and during wet years. But they remain the largest sources in dry years, but by a smaller margin. So wastewater rivals cropland drainage in dry years. Wastewater can also be significant locally, right? These are statewide data, but if you imagine a large wastewater discharge to a low flow stream or a small stream, the wastewater impact significance can be great. Okay, so that's the why. So now the what. So we have effluent limits for facilities. For ammonia, we have a lot of ammonia limits that go back a long time. Primarily, in rule of thumb, is if the ratio of the facility's dry weather design flow to the 7Q10 stream flow is less than 30 to 1, then ammonia limits are indicated. So ammonia limits are not shown on these maps. What these maps show are total nitrogen and nitrite plus nitrate effluent limits. The map on the left shows basically discharges to groundwater. These are land application systems, subsurface disposal systems, and the like. And we have many of those, and they are intended to protect groundwater. And basically based on the 10 milligram per liter drinking water standard that has been in effect for a long time. The map on the right shows total nitrogen and nitrite plus nitrate limits for surface water discharge facilities, and there are relatively few of those, 12 currently. And 4 of those were relatively recent. There's a cluster in southeast Minnesota, and most of those are discharges to losing streams in karst topography, and so these are basically also intended to protect drinking water sources, because the thought is that the wastewater could affect drinking water wells. There are a few exceptions. They're in that blue dots, so I should have said, sorry, the blue dots are municipal or domestic discharges, and the orange dots are industrial. There's a blue dot in Windham, kind of in the southwest. That limit is based on effluent toxicity. The facility was failing toxicity tests, and the toxicity was linked to nitrate, and so they ended up with a nitrogen limit for that. Orinoco, kind of up here, right near Rochester, right near Rochester, has voluntarily accepted a total nitrogen limit based on our regulatory certainty regulations that went into effect a few years ago to encourage early reductions of nitrogen. So they're building a new facility, should be going online any day, and they will have a total nitrogen limit. There are a couple that are linked to TMDL wastewater allocations for cold water streams that exceeded the 10 milligram per liter nitrate standard. That also applies to all of our cold water streams are also our 2A waters, but they're also 1B waters, so drinking water sources potentially. So there were a couple of TMDLs for those. And then the orange ones are based on federal effluent limit guidelines for industrial facilities. And while they have limits in their permits, those permit limits are based on production of whatever it is they produce, and not on water quality. So the concentration targets for those effluent limits can be quite high. Okay, so loads. This graph represents statewide effluent total nitrogen loads from 2010 through 2023. So prior to 2010, we had very little monitoring data for total nitrogen. There were in 2010, we started to include nitrogen series monitoring in all domestic wastewater permits. And those were pretty infrequent. I think there were twice a year monitoring requirements. And so
just set them on the dresser in that other room after I take a shower.
So
you can't go beyond the stitch
the
pulling.
frequency of monitoring and the number of permits with monitoring grew slowly until following the publication of the nitrogen reduction strategy in 2014. What happened at that point is we realized we really didn't know very much about what wastewater's footprint was with respect to nitrogen. And so the light blue represents estimated values. So basically loads based on typical pollutant concentrations. The dark blue value for municipal facilities, the dark blue segments of the column represents data derived from monitoring results. And so essentially what the graph shows is that while the loads remain very stable at 14,000 to 15,000 metric tons per year, the confidence in the validity of the data has increased over time. Sorry, Teams is, or not Teams, WebEx is sending me messages. Most of the nitrogen is coming from municipal wastewater treatment facilities. The green segments represent industrial estimated loads, and the red kind of tips of the spears represent industrial monitored loads. So the table shows essentially where, the breakdown, 92% of the load is coming from domestic facilities, 8% from industrial, 91% is from major facilities, and only 9% from minor facilities, and then so on and so forth, 86% from domestic majors and 5% from industrial majors. So industrial doesn't represent a lot of the total wastewater load, but some industries have very significant discharges. And the loads essentially have not changed much over time. So how does that stack up with the nutrient reduction strategy? The gold or yellow columns represent the baseline loads for the nutrient reduction strategy. And so those were 2010 to 2012 data that were based somewhat on estimated information. The blue columns represent the 2020 through 2022, so the current load essentially. And what you can see is that the loads increased in the Mississippi River Basin, but decreased in the other basins from the baseline. But remember, the baseline was somewhat of an estimate. The orange column segments represent what would happen, what we think would happen to the loads in these basins once we implement all those water quality-based effluent limits that I talked about earlier. So to meet the water quality standards, the draft water quality standards, and to address those IBI impairments. And so then the gray segments in the top two graphs represent the nutrient reduction strategy goals. And so what the significance of this is essentially that implementing those water quality-based effluent limits alone will not get us to the nutrient reduction strategy goals. That additional reductions are needed beyond those for local in-state water quality to meet our downstream reduction goals. This is largely because many of our very large wastewater facilities, our large major municipal facilities, discharge to large rivers that have extremely large dilution ratios and have relatively low nitrate concentrations. So large municipal wastewater plant, many large municipal wastewater plants would not be subject to these reduction goals based on our toxicity standards and our IBI standards. So there is a need for additional reductions beyond our water quality-based effluent limits. And essentially what you're seeing here is that in the Mississippi, implementing our water quality-based effluent limits would result in 11% reduction from baseline and 23% reduction from current load. In the red, it would get us a 19% reduction from the baseline and a 10% reduction from the current load. And remember, what we're looking for are 45% reduction in Mississippi from baseline and a 50% reduction in the Red River. We don't have goals yet for the Lake Superior and for the Rainy River Basin. So what is this? So here we get here we get to the how part of the presentation. Well, what is it that we are doing? So we published this nutrient reduction strategy in April. It was developed in consultation with municipal and industrial wastewater stakeholders. But to be clear, the stakeholders have not endorsed this policy, but they did provide valuable input. So it's essentially set up in 3 phases. During phase 1, we have a guidance. I wrote policy here, but we have a guidance document for new, expanded, and significantly upgraded wastewater treatment facilities to be designed for denitrification. We have a requirement for nitrogen management plans to be developed and for enhanced nitrogen management plans if facilities are discharging upstream of these IBI impairments with nitrate stressors. There's an incentive for early reductions through optimization, and we are going to be working on the rulemakings for our water quality standards and for our effluent limits. So Chapter 7050 and Chapter 7053. And the second part, this Chapter 7053, is we would be developing a 10 milligram per liter total nitrogen. We call it a state discharge restriction because we lack imagination. But essentially, these are effluent limits for major municipal facilities and other high concentration dischargers. So we will be developing the rules essentially during phase 1, and we have these steps that begin to implement reductions and management of nitrogen. Phase 2 begins after these rules have been adopted. So we're probably looking at least 3 years from now, and that is probably an optimistic assumption. So once those rules are in place, we would be implementing the water quality-based effluent limits and state discharge restrictions, and there would most likely be compliance schedules associated with those because facilities cannot necessarily immediately meet an effluent limit. So there's time built in for them to design and build what is needed to meet these effluent limits. We hope that those compliance schedules will be shorter than they otherwise would have been because of all this optimization and nitrogen management planning work that's gone on during phase 1. Phase 3 is about that incentive. So the incentive in phase 1 is facilities that are able to reduce their effluent concentrations to 15 milligrams per liter as a 12-month moving average will qualify for basically skipping the first permit cycle during phase 2, and their limits won't be implemented until the following permit cycle in phase 3. So if anyone participates, then phase 3 is really about delaying the implementation of a permit limit by 1 permit cycle. I mentioned the 12-month moving average. So these 10 milligram per liter state discharge restrictions are the plan is to have a limit type that allows for some variability in the month-to-month concentration. And so we plan to implement them as 12-month moving averages which means that during, if, say, for example, a facility had, let's say, a 12 milligram per liter 1 month, but an 8 milligram per liter, another month, as long as that's a 12-month moving average, they maintain that 10 milligram per liter concentration, they would be in compliance. It provides some flexibility. Okay, so what are they actually doing now? These are a breakdown of total nitrogen effluent concentrations by facility class. All municipal facilities and a few industrial facilities are classified into these class A, B, C, and D classes. Class A tend to be the more sophisticated facilities that have more challenging effluent limits, more technology. They're kind of more of state-of-the-art facilities. Class B tend to be a little bit less sophisticated, maybe have fewer challenging effluent limits. It used to be they were a little bit smaller, but now we have a lot of small Class A facilities. And so on with Class C, they're even, they're more rudimentary mechanical. All Class A, B, and C are all continuously discharging facilities, so they're not storing wastewater for a long time. Class D tend to be these stabilization ponds. So stabilization ponds are large settling basins. They are designed to hold water for 180 to 210 days, depending on their location. And they have surprisingly excellent total nitrogen effluent concentrations. You can see they average 4.4 milligrams per liter, while Class A and B and C facilities average around 19 to 20 milligrams per liter. Then we have some high concentration industrial facilities. There are relatively few of them, probably 6 or 7, but they can have very, very high concentrations. And then we have nearly 1,000, probably maybe I'll say about 600 low concentration industrial facilities. These can be non-contact cooling water discharges, gravel pit dewatering discharges. They can be groundwater, pump outs, all sorts of things. RO reject waters. They tend to be very low also. So what we did is we took the mean and added 1 standard deviation for each class. And we used that in the lower table as a threshold to determine whether a facility is a high concentration or a low concentration facility. And that is important for the next slide, which is difficult to read. And I apologize, this is a screenshot from the policy. So the columns are color-coded red and blue, and the blue are low concentration, the red are high concentration. We have major municipal facilities, minor municipal facilities, and industrial discharges. And then the rows, basically this represents phase 1, show basically the process as we envision it, the adoption of the water quality standards and the effluent limits rules. High concentration facilities during this first permit cycle will be required to develop and implement nitrogen management plans. New and expanded and significantly upgraded facilities will be designed and built. If they discharge upstream of IBI impaired waters with nitrate stressors, they must be designed and built to meet nitrogen water quality-based effluent limits, which will be included in their permits. Other new and expanded and significantly upgraded facilities that are not upstream of these IBI impairments need to be designed for denitrification, but not necessarily built yet until their effluent limits take effect. But we don't want them to design facilities that will be incapable of meeting future effluent limits. So we want to see some consideration during the design phase for how denitrification will be accomplished when the time comes. And then if facilities have reasonable potential, sorry about the acronym, for exceeding the existing 10 milligram per liter drinking water standard, then we will develop effluent limits as we are doing now. That is nothing new. Then facilities discharging upstream of IBI impairments will develop and implement enhanced nitrogen management plans, which essentially means a nitrogen management plan with a goal, with a concentration-based goal, and not just a more general plan that would be, for other facilities. And then TMDL waste allocations would be developed where appropriate. Phase 2 and phase 3, basically in phase 2, we will have adopted those rules, and so we have all facilities now developing and implementing nitrogen management plans, including the low concentration ones. We have 10 milligram per liter state discharge restriction effluent limits for major municipal facilities, and for high concentration minor municipal and high concentration industrial facilities. And then the facilities that have reasonable potential to cause an exceedance of the water quality standards, or will basically be subject to water quality-based effluent limits. And then phase 3 is about the incentive that was available in phase 1. So facilities that qualified for the incentive will now have those effluent limits during the second permit cycle after the rules have been adopted. So a few more things. We're going to rush through because I'm going to run out of time. Guidance for new, expanded, and significantly upgraded wastewater treatment facilities. So basically, if facilities contribute to drinking water, have the potential to cause an exceedance of a drinking water standard, or discharge nitrate concentrations causing biological stress to aquatic organisms, the MPCA will develop effluent limits that will ensure that downstream users are protected. Effluent limits will be included in the first permit issued for these facilities, for these upgrades, and construction of all necessary treatment units will be required to achieve denitrification sufficient to protect downstream uses. So, and then for all other discharges, so the ones that do not necessarily contribute to IBI impairments, or then their facility plans or other planning documents will be required to include considerations for denitrification to levels sufficient protected downstream uses. Construction is not required until the effluent limits are in effect. I said this all before. The picture is of the Otsego West wastewater plant in construction. One thing I should say is there's a new term here, significantly upgraded. By that we intend processing or upgrades where the biological treatment units are being upgraded or significantly modified. So there's a lot going on in wastewater treatment plants. We're really only looking at essentially the activated sludge processes. And if those are being significantly modified, we want to see considerations for denitrification. We have relatively few new facilities. We have many expansions. They happen on a regular basis. Nitrogen management plans. So we developed a bunch of tools to assist with data review, facility performance evaluation, and process control monitoring plans. The goals and complexities of these nitrogen management plans will depend on various local factors like facility performance, source reduction potential, facility optimization potential, permit requirements for enhanced NMP development and or other effluent limits, water quality trading plans, which is kind of an item that's of interest to me, and current or future facility upgrade plans. So there isn't a single template, a single one-size-fits-all nitrogen management plan. It will really depend a lot on what is going on with the facility, what is going on with future plans for the facility, and so on. So we developed these tools. There's a guidance document that basically walks through data review, facility performance evaluation, process control monitoring, various goals that can be established, and implementation plans. And then we developed a couple of tools. There's a data summary tool, which is a Tableau public report. And I'll give an example of some of that in the next slide, and is intended to assist with development of the nitrogen management plan and provides kind of some benchmarking examples so you can compare your facility to other similar facilities to find out if you're doing well or if you're not doing so well. And then there's an Excel DMR lookup tool, which is basically set up with data that facilities can use to generate charts and graphs and presentation material for their nitrogen management plans. So here's an example of the Tableau public report. And I selected the city of Austin, which might be a little bit unfair. Sorry, the text is so small. But these are basically two of maybe 5 or 6 screens that are available. So you can select the facility, and on the left you see a concentration and flow comparison. So it will show you for both influent and effluent concentrations, what the the range of values, the mean and median concentration, and the basically the 10th to the 90th percent concentration values for the facility on the left side of the for the selected facility, and then it shows the same values for similar facilities, so for other Class A major municipal facilities in this case. And it will do the same for the effluent, and it will do the same for the flow as a percent of design flow. And the reason it does that is facilities that have a lot of spare hydraulic capacity have a lot of potential for optimization. Facilities that do not have a lot of spare hydraulic capacity have relatively limited optimization potential. The graphs show basically the same thing. So the blue dots represent the selected facility, and the cloud of gray dots represent the other similar facilities. And the reason I said it's a little bit unfair is Austin has very, very, very high concentrations because of their large industrial food processing component. So they provide treatment for the Hormel company or Hormels company, if you wish. And so you can see that they have extremely high concentrations. They have 2 influence stations. There's an industrial influence station and a municipal influence station, a domestic. And then they combine in the effluent. And so, they can have concentrations up to, nearly 100 milligrams per liter total nitrogen, which is really, really high. Okay, so we do all of this, and this is what we see in the future. If once this plan is implemented, these echo the graphs that I showed you earlier. The gold bar, again, is the nutrient reduction strategy baseline. The blue bar is the current effluent load for total nitrogen. The orange bar has been replaced with the green bar here, and it shows what we predict the effluent loads will be at current flows after the strategy has been implemented. And then the gray segments for the top 2 represent the goals. So what we see here is that implementing the strategy will achieve the nutrient reduction strategy goals. We will obtain a 53% reduction from baseline for the Mississippi River and a 60% reduction from current values. The goal is 45. For the Red River, we'll obtain a 61% reduction from baseline and a 57% reduction from current, and the goal is 50. For Lake Superior, there will be a 45% reduction from baseline, a 15% reduction from current, and there, we have no target yet. And for the Rainy, we'll obtain a 37% reduction from baseline, a 23% reduction from current, and again, we have no goal yet. And that's it. And I didn't run out of time. Now I'm going to try to stop sharing and see if I can find the chat. But please unmute and ask questions if you have any. I'm still looking for the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Margot. Brooke did have to step out, so she asked me to post, and I don't see any questions yet in the chat. People can also unmute themselves.
Hi, Marco.
Craig,
this is
please
Craig
go
in
ahead.
Duluth.
Hi, Craig.
Great presentation. I was just curious on how the developers of the strategy factored in or considered or viewed unauthorized releases from municipal, industrial, or feedlot sources. It's kind of one of those untracked sources. They're intermittent, but yet have a potential for impact. So I was just curious on your reaction to unauthorized discharges from those sources.
Yes, and we did not at all. I mean, I think the way we looked at that is the same way in which we think of those with permits and with TMDLs, which is they are not authorized. They are compliance and enforcement issues. They are, you know, issues to be discontinued and to be dealt with, but they're not planned into the loadings for the future.
Makes sense. Thank you.
So to fill the space while you guys think about questions, one thing I hope to have time to say is that, you know, in domestic wastewater and food processing, industrial wastewater, a lot of the waste essentially comes in as ammonia, and a lot of effort has gone into reducing ammonia concentrations because of their acute toxicity and their local effects. But what happens is that you essentially, in conventional wastewater treatment, you convert ammonia to nitrate. And so the total nitrogen, the total nitrogen loading does not change essentially from the influent to effluent. It does somewhat because there's some denitrification that occurs as nitrate that goes into the biosolids and is removed that way. But essentially, we're just, changing ammonia to nitrate in conventional wastewater treatment. And in these advanced denitrification systems, what happens is you fully nitrify until there's no ammonia left. And then in anoxic and anaerobic zones, the nitrate is converted to nitrogen gas and emitted as nitrogen gas. And it takes a lot of doing. There's a lot of, very specific populations of bugs that need to be cultivated and kept alive and healthy, and a lot of recirculation that has to happen through the facility to bring the water back over and over again to accomplish that. But it also has an effect on the ultimate hydraulic capacity of the facility. because a lot of the water keeps coming through, and therefore there's less room for new water to come through. Well, you were a quiet bunch. I bored everyone to tears.
There's one additional question in the chat now from Craig. Any general themes from the feedback MPCA received from the regulated community?
Yes. Not a lot of enthusiasm. As you can imagine, there are a lot of cost concerns. But particularly because there's so many other challenges going on at the same time. There's a lot of feedback about the sulfate and chloride and PFAS, and how this is how we are piling on with all these new requirements. And they make a good point. The one thing I would say is, nitrogen is a treatable pollutant. Wastewater treatment facilities can be designed to fix this, while some of these other pollutants are really either not currently within the technical capabilities of wastewater plants. So sulfate, for example, could presumably be removed biologically, but it would be a very advanced system. Chloride would require reverse osmosis at wastewater plants, which is not currently either affordable or probably desirable, considering the waste streams that it would develop. And PFAS are, a lot of you know a lot more about that than I do. But nitrogen is the stuff of biological treatment, so it can be done.
See, Matt Linden has his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. Great presentation. I'm just wondering if you had like a word or 2 words to describe what you think about the strategy, whether it be pragmatic, aggressive, whether it be collaborative, that type of a term. What comes to your mind?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's always a tension, right? Particularly with wastewater facilities that feel overregulated, right? They look at non-point sources and say, well, wait a moment, wastewater is 9% of the total. What about what about the rest? What about what's happening with non-point sources, and they're unregulated largely, and that sort of thing. And of course, that there has been a lot going on with non-point, and we think there will be more going on after these new standards are developed, and so it will take time. We put a lot of effort into nitrogen management planning and facility optimization, in discussing water quality trading, which will come up with Paul's next item in the chat. Wastewater operators are an interesting group, right? Because they operate these complex facilities. They want to do really well. They're very proud of doing very well. And this is a new arena for them, right? There's been so much effort over the last 20 years in phosphorus reduction, and I didn't dwell on it, but we had a phosphorus strategy in 2000 that eventually led to about an 80% reduction statewide in phosphorus loadings from wastewater treatment facilities, which was spectacular. It took time, but it went very well, and at the beginning we had the very same conversations. It can't be done, it's expensive. Why why are we focusing on wastewater when there's so much non-pointing? All the same conversations, and yet, 25 years later, 24 years later, the success is undeniable, and it is routine. So, we hope over the next 20 years or so, within kind of the context of the time frames of the nutrient reduction strategy, that we will see similar reductions in nitrogen. So I'm not sure I answered your question, Matt, but I tried. But I see another comment, Paul. Could credit trading be used for nitrogen down the road with upstream contributors like ag? And the answer is absolutely yes, Paul. I think there's a lot of potential for nitrogen trading, particularly in the non-point, so point non-point trading. The practices will be different than what we've seen for phosphorus. Nitrogen is largely, non-point nitrogen is largely dissolved, while non-point phosphorus was largely particulate. So the BMPs that will generate credits will probably be very different than the ones that we've seen for phosphorus, right? Stream bank restoration will probably not feature for nitrogen reductions, while wetland restoration or wetland creation and biofilters and all sorts of practices that address the dissolved nature of nitrate will probably be the way to go. So Justin writes, notable that simpler facilities like ponds provide better net denitrification via residence time and biological activity. Similar concepts holding tile water in ponds for the same purpose. It works, and that's right, and that's the cropland drainage is one of the two large sources, and Iowa has done a lot of work with surfacing tile lines, daylighting tile lines in wetlands, and has obtained some success in doing that. And I expect those are the kinds of things we will see. Ponds, wastewater stabilization ponds are really amazing. I mean, they continue to outperform expectations. They're relatively inexpensive. They can be somewhat expensive to build because land is expensive and they take up a lot of space. So they're expensive from a land acquisition standpoint, but they essentially do not require any electrical input other than the pumps and the lift stations that get the wastewater to the ponds. Sometimes there's chemical addition for phosphorus removal particularly, but for nitrogen, they do great work unless they are overloaded hydraulically or organically, in which case they stink, literally.
Thank you so much, Marco. It looks like we're about out of time, and I'm not seeing any more questions or chats or hands up or anything.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And if Mark or Brooke were here, they would say wonderful, inspiring words about the next session, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I don't either.
Very well.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Marco.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.